Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Kwiatkowski, and thank you for joining us for today's live Q&A. Today, we have Christen Cummens joining us from the Student Health Center. We're going to be talking about exercise and mental health and the impacts that it has on us individually and also as a member of the LSU community. Thank you so much for joining us. These live Q&As have been really important to us as we seek input from all of you as our faculty, staff, students on campus, part of that LSU community. Please make sure that you keep your microphone muted throughout the session today, just so that we're not getting any feedback. But if you do want to provide any feedback to us directly, feel free to go ahead and add that right into the chat. If there were questions that you weren't able to ask prior to today's session, just add them into the chat and we'll go ahead and try to address them right at the end here. So after that, I think we should be all set. Christen, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So as it says here, my name is Christen Cummens. I'm a clinical social worker, and I work in the Student Health Center with mental health service. Actually, if you want to move to that first, thank you. So where I want to start is by introducing myself is to explain what I do and how the exercise impacts me in my professional life. So like I said, I work at LSU Mental Health. I've been providing individual and group therapy to LSU students for 9 years now. And I do regularly recommend clients incorporate exercise into their life for mental health benefits. So it's something that I suggest and offer with clients and try to help them integrate that. And to refer to my own personal life, I believe it's important to practice what I'm recommending to others. So, to explain that this is something that I do as well and that I've experienced my own benefits. So I've been exercising regularly for at least the last 22 years. That's just what I could track. I see exercise as a really vital part of my self-care. It gives me a healthy outlet for stressors. It improves my mood, it improves my outlook, and it clears my mind. I tend to exercise in the evening, and part of the reason for that is that it usually helps me transition. So if I have a busy day, if I've been focused on other people, on different issues and problems, whether that be professional at work or personal, going to exercise, it usually really helps me to let go of that. And part of it is the opportunity to be mindful. So when you're doing physical activity, you usually have to focus on it, or else you can hurt yourself or not do what you're supposed to be doing. And so it really helps, I think, for me to get out of my head. And so often I'll start and kind of just have all these things running through my head, worries from the day, thoughts I'm still having going on. Usually by the time I'm done, it's kind of cleared out and I can really transition into my evening. So, that's kind of how I see it for myself. Thank you. So we'll start by talking about some of the overall benefits of mental health or exercise to mental health. Some of these, may seem obvious if you exercise, some of them may not. So hopefully some new information, some may be just validating what you experience if you've been exercising yourself. So it definitely can promote a sense of well-being. And it can offer increased energy, which can seem sort of counterintuitive because you feel like you're having to use a lot of energy to exercise, but it actually increases energy. It can enhance better sleep. It can increase your ability to relax, offer a sense of calm. It can increase memory and brain functioning. It can foster a more positive outlook that contributes to a better mood. So some of these are sort of overlapping, that sense of well-being, positive outlook, they kind of all fit together. Increased self-esteem and increased immune system and functioning. So physical health, emotional health, mental health, all sort of combined here. And I can explain some of those more if we need to as we go along. So how exercise directly impacts common mental health diagnoses. So one of the things I thought might be useful is to talk about how exercise can help with some of the most common diagnoses that we see or have reported by students at the Mental Health Center. And two of the most common diagnoses that we see are depression and anxiety. So I wanted to kind of really kind of give some more detail about how exercise can impact those diagnoses. Because I think, you know, most obviously maybe with depression, people who are depressed usually identify a lack of energy, a lack of motivation. And so trying to say, you know what, exercise really help you out is, you know, can also be really kind of challenging to help with motivating that. But we'll start there and kind of talk about depression. If you can move to the next one for me. So with depression, so there are several ways that exercise impacts on depression or helps decrease depression. So the first, it directly affects the brain. So it can, regular exercise, and I will talk later about what's recommended for benefit, like how much exercise, but regular exercise increases the volume of certain brain regions. So you're getting better blood supply as you're exercising, and that improves what we call neuronal health. So the neurons in the brain, the neural pathways, by improving the delivery of oxygen and nutrients. And through an increase in neurotrophic factors and neurohormones that support neuron signaling, growth, and connections. So this is a bunch of science, you know, kind of jargon here to explain basically the flow and operation of the neural pathways in the brain. So it's increasing that, it's making it more productive, easier flow. And in specifically one part of the brain, the hippocampus, which is an area of the brain that's involved in memory, emotion regulation. So emotion regulation means how you manage your emotions. So if you felt sad, how well you can handle that sadness and still be able to function, or mad or whatever it is, and learning. So memory, emotion regulation, and learning. You know, on a little side note, the hippocampus is one of the parts of the brain that's most impacted by trauma. And so I don't talk a lot about PTSD response, but to just kind of point that out here, that if it's impacting and helping this for depression, it's pretty likely that this would also be beneficial in trauma and PTSD response. So evidence is accumulating, so scientific research accumulating that many mental health conditions are associated with reduced neurogenesis in the hippocampus. So less of that, right? Less production, slower movement production of that. So that we were once thought to work through their effects on serotonin. So once we really thought that depression was mostly impacted by the serotonin level in our brain, which is chemical produced in our brain that does help regulate mood. But now there's a lot of thought that the increase in neurogenesis in the hippocampus is what can really help boost and improve mood related to depression. So the research is showing that the serotonin level impact that you see with antidepressants, that the antidepressants are also, not only are they targeting that serotonin, but they're also targeting the neurogenesis, like and increasing that that speed and ability to process in the hippocampus. You can move to the next one for me. So neurogenesis allows a healthy level of flexibility in the use of existing memories and in the flexible processing of new information. So flexibility of memory and thought processing. So much mental health, many mental health issues are characterized by cognitive inflexibility. So an inability to kind of see beyond like what's sometimes right in front of you. I'll often think of depression can often have like a tunnel vision. And so if you think about that as a sort of a cognitive inflexibility, you're not able to see a bigger picture. You kind of see things in a very negative, you know, kind of view. So if you kind of understand that a little more in terms of depression in particular. So it keeps us repeating unhelpful behaviors. So if we have a negative outlook and we think, you know, this is the only way things can be, then we might keep repeating behaviors that reinforce that belief. So it restricts our ability to process or even acknowledge new information and reduces our ability to use what we already know to see new solutions or change. So it can help, it kind of helps someone who might already be struggling with depression, kind of keep them in that place and then reinforce it. It's plausible that exercise can lead to better mental health in general through its effects on the systems that increase the capacity for mental flexibility. And just to clarify that, because I feel like this is a lot of kind of jargon being thrown at people, but really that flexibility would be in that neural pathway and in the hippocampus. So if memories and processing of new information can be increased flexibility there, then it's going to be easier for people to identify different ways to address a problem or see beyond maybe what has become a very narrow point of view. Okay, you can move on from there. Okay, so that is one way. It directly impacts the brain. So it also, exercise can also impact depression by releasing endorphins, which are chemicals in your brain that brighten your mood and make you feel good. So if anyone's ever experienced that, you don't need to do a lot of really intense exercise to get that, but usually at some point, if you've been, kind of getting your heart rate up a little bit, doing something more active, you might notice that you kind of have a kind of a surge of good feeling. Sometimes it just kind of feels like you're more relaxed, like your body kind of loosens up, but that's actually a chemical released in your brain. And so obviously, if your mood's impacted and your mood is brighter, and you literally feel physically better, then that can definitely impact how we're feeling if we're depressed, because you're picking up on more energy, potentially more positive outlook, and then it also again makes it easier to look beyond where you are at that moment and see possibilities. So I think I kind of alluded, can you go back one? I just had one last little thing there. I guess I don't really need to read it, but providing a distraction. So what I would say is that, that may be a poor way of describing it, but it fits. It's really about mindfulness. But by providing a distraction, what I said before, like if you focus on the exercise, you can't really keep thinking about a problem or something that you're trying to deal with right now, or things that you had to deal with throughout the day. So, or if you're depressed, right, like maybe there's something that you're really been sad about, there's some issues in your life, circumstances that you really want to be able to change, and you just feel really stuck. Well, what happens often in depression as well as in anxiety is that people will begin to ruminate. So which really means you just keep thinking through the same problem. But if you think about it, if your brain has a kind of an inflexibility at this point, you can't really see beyond that kind of narrowed scope you're in. You're just basically circling through the same thoughts and ideas over and over again. And if they're negative, then it's just reinforcing that. So if you are able to if you're exercising, it kind of provides you something to focus on. And because you're getting your heart rate up and you're trying to do something that's physically challenging, it forces you to pay attention to that. And so in a way, it becomes a distraction from that rumination. It pulls your mind away from that because you have to focus on the activity. So if you think about it, if you're biking and you don't pay attention to where you're riding, or that your feet are on the pedal correctly, you could fall or injure yourself, or just not get the result. So it's important to kind of recognize, like, just the focus on that. You don't have to try and not get lost, lose your thoughts. It's going to happen because if you're focusing on the activity, you're going to get some distraction from whatever you've been thinking about, worried about, sad about. Okay, thanks.
Kristen, with that, are there like sparks or different things that you use to like get yourself off of those negative ruminations? Either just different things that kind of get you back.
Like strategies?
Yeah, different strategies.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're actually exercising, I think, what the mental health, let's say, what a therapist strategy might be with rumination is when you catch yourself in rumination, which is what you're talking about, right? Like if you notice you're doing it, like you've been sitting there for 30 minutes and you're still thinking about the same thing. It's not getting solved. There's nothing different. Once you begin to notice that you're doing that, one suggestion is that you would look for something to distract you, which would be an active, like engaging activity. So it's something that has to engage your mind. Because if it's passive, like you can watch TV and still have those worries circling around. But if you recognize that you need something to kind of short circuit the thought pattern. And so what I would say is, if you're just doing this for yourself, it might be, well, let me go, I don't really want to do that homework, but if I focus on that homework, it'll get me off this thought pattern. Or let me go call a friend, and we can talk about what we're going to do this weekend. So anything like that is like a non-exercise version. But if you think about the exercise piece and bringing that in, I think that if you find yourself, kind of ruminating and you're going to go do the exercise, as you notice your brain drifting, you're going to call yourself back to, okay, what am I doing right now? How can I focus on this activity? And so whatever it is, if you're lifting a weight, if you're doing a class, if you're trying to track those thoughts in your head, it's going to be really hard. But you can still do it if you're really anxious or you're really depressed. It's pretty easy because it's gotten to be so familiar. but it's kind of, it's redirecting yourself back to the activity. But some activities, you know, if you do something kind of that gets your heart rate up, I think also, even if you're trying to stay focused, it's harder to stay focused because you're going to have to bring your attention to regulating your breathing, you know, the increased blood flow in your body, everything that's going to be happening. Your body's going to be stimulated in a different way than what you're used to when you're just walking around every day. So does that help a little bit?
Oh, totally. And I agree. I think a lot of times when working with clients on the personal training end, we encourage somebody to come in with their workout plan. I use a small book that I use, and every workout I do is written down. So even if it's a matter of I break my workout into chunks, so I have to go back to the book and write down what exercise I did and kind of refocuses me, resets my goals for that day. I'm not going 45 minutes without anything to check myself. I make sure that there are checks and balances throughout my workout to hold me in that one place. Now, that's a little bit different when you get into like a group exercise format where you're in a room, but the person that holds you accountable is going to be the instructor in the front of the room.
Right.
Whereas with like when you're on your own, it's a little bit more difficult, but you'll also see the difference in the users within a fitness area from the one who has a plan, comes in with it written down, is focused in, dialed in, and somebody who just walks in and might not have a game plan and kind of looks around the room and says, all right, what am I doing today? What looks attractive today? What looks like it would be fun? What looks like it would be hard? And we all know that when there's no plan there for either the workout or for anything, you kind of lose your way and you get stuck in a lot of those thoughts that take you off to the side and might not be positive or beneficial for you.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And you're getting at something that I think is another really basic tool that we look at with depression and anxiety, frankly, but, you know, kind of the idea of scheduling things and planning. And what you're really pointing out is how effective that can be if you really want to get this benefit from exercise, right? Like if you do just sort of come in wandering around, then yes, it is really easy to get yourself caught up in your head and you know, not be able to be mindful or feel productive either, you know, because I think that's another benefit for me that I noticed, and I think a lot of people experience, is that, like you said, you have a goal for the day, that you can feel some sense of achievement and feel productive when you've achieved it. And so if you are just sort of wandering around, then it's pretty hard to measure that, right? Exactly. And so I was thinking, you know, some other strategies I can think about is, for me, I do a lot of biking and indoor and outdoors, and I always have a heart rate monitor. And you know, not that everyone has to go out and purchase one. I think there's some pretty affordable ones these days, but anything that's monitoring what your body's doing, I think that's also another way to kind of bring your focus there. And it's not about, you know, like beating certain goals necessarily, but you'll notice if you're not in the range you need to be in. So that's another way that you can kind of find yourself, you know, bring yourself back to focus too. Like, where am I supposed to be? What am I trying to do here?
Oh, totally. There's definitely a psychology behind the use of heart rate monitors, either Fitbit, Apple Watch, whatever, where if it alerts you that you haven't gotten enough steps in that hour, or maybe you're in a competition with friends and it tracks you for the week. There's a psychology behind that, where there's an accountability there, that when you have none of those plans, you kind of just go by the wayside a little bit. And we all recognize that it comes in steps too. For some people, that first step is just showing up. It's that first time walking through the door. But now the next steps, as we get used to the walking through the door, it's, all right, what's my plan when I get through the door? So I feel that achievement on my way out. That's great.
All right. Yeah. Well, and I probably, this is probably somewhere in this presentation, but while we're on that topic, it just makes me think too that, you know, when people are looking to use exercise and it's not what's they're familiar, right? Like if we're talking about somebody coming in and, you know, like you said, first step, I think a big part of it that I always really emphasize with clients, if I'm talking about it, is finding what works for you too, you know, because I think that, you know, on the other hand, I think you can end up feeling really frustrated and maybe even confirming negative outlook things if you don't, if you keep trying to do something that isn't your thing, right? Like either it challenges you physically in a way that you're not built for, or, you know, or you're trying to do something that's way too advanced, and so you feel unsuccessful when you do it, or you really hate running, but you just keep wanting to do the running, but really probably you would get the benefit you're looking for from, you know, either walking or swimming or, like, so exploring, and I think also finding a right fit is a really important part of it too.
That's great.
Okay, well, we'll move on to anxiety. So the other big, big two, I think, of what we get in terms of people coming in. So I just put anxiety plus exercise equals here. So decreased tension and stress, increased physical and mental energy. I'll stop for a second just to, identify, I assume everyone knows what depression and anxiety are and what they look like. But, I think really, talk about increased, or decreased tension and stress. Just think about for a moment anxiety. I think maybe just distinguish anxiety from stress. Stress is, I think, the kind of management of sometimes more than we can, than we would like to, or really feel like we have time to do sometimes, feeling more pressured. But I think we typically consider when somebody feels stressed as a response to the kind of normal expectations of life. It's a typical response that all people would have at different points. Versus anxiety, where it's sort of like an out. The response is outside the really what would be appropriate for what they're reacting to. So it's sort of like a more fear-based response, and it's usually more extreme, where it feels more extreme, and it's very physical. So then, and that may be why, it's pretty easy to understand the benefits of exercise with anxiety, because there's a lot of energy in our body that gets, our nervous system is activated when we're anxious, our fear responses are kicked off. So, what will happen is we'll tense up in different ways, physically, muscle tension. So that decreased tension and stress, the exercise can do that. Increase physical and mental energy. So enhancing your sense of well-being through the release of endorphins. So you're noticing some of these are the same as with depression. And offering that mindfulness. I think, it's even more important for anxiety, because most people with anxiety have a lot of anxious thinking. And because most of our anxiety is fear-based, where we're worried about things happening, or different experiences that could happen, or worst case scenarios. And so, all of these really help, again, get you away from that, get you focused on something else. And can, if you think about it, if your whole body is activated, the more extreme version of that is if we have something really frightening happening, our natural physical response, the physiological response to something really frightening, is that our fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response will kick off, and that's automatic. We have no control over whether that happens. And we know that feeling. I always talk about it. The one that I identified is if somebody almost hits you while you're driving or something, you know that jolt of adrenaline. So you've got all that extra energy in your body. And so if it makes a lot of sense for somebody with anxiety, you can really easily see where doing exercise can just help burn up some of that nervous energy, all that extra energy, adrenaline surging through your system. And so that calming and relaxing the muscles, because all of those physical symptoms are now cueing your brain something's wrong, because your body's in that fight, flight, freeze, right? Like, so your body's activated, it's tensed up, it's ready to fight or whatever, fly or whatever it needs to do. And so just any of these responses to exercise, even just decreasing tension and stress, if your body is less tense and stressed, then your brain's going to interpret less to be fearful and anxious about. Okay, so the other one I included in here, I thought this was kind of neat because I didn't really know it until I found this. So how exercise can help benefit ADHD. The physical activity immediately boosts the brain's dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin levels. So those are 3 chemicals in your brain that all have an impact on mood. But they also have an impact on focus and attention. So if you think about, those are the main challenges with an ADHD diagnosis: focus and attention. So if that is immediately boosting those serotonin levels, norepinephrine levels, dopamine levels in your brain, then it's going to help you. They went on to argue that it could be as beneficial as a stimulant, which is usually what's prescribed for ADHD. I don't know the research on that, but that sounds pretty powerful. You can move to the next one. Okay. So what I also wanted to talk about was, another way that I find that exercise can really benefit people is, I really think that the process of training physically is such a nice metaphor. It's very comparable to what I think people are asked to do if they do participate in therapy, if they want to make changes in their life, if they want to face challenges. And so I often find myself using exercise metaphors in some of my sessions, because it really does kind of go by the same experience where we're how we face challenges, how we change harmful behaviors, patterns, belief systems. So if you think about, if you're going to do something, say you decide you want to start running, and you've never run. So there's going to be some things there, right? Like it's not as simple as, and some of us have probably even tried something like this, just deciding I'm going to go run and then, putting on some tennis shoes and bolting, right? Usually you can't last very long. Things will start hurting. You will get tired very quickly. You'll get out of breath very quickly. And so you will quickly usually get slowed down. And so, really, if you think about training for anything like this, you quickly realize there's going to have to be a process in place. And I know for running, there's tons of apps and things out there in these days that really help somebody work through that process, right? Like where they, I think somebody was doing one not too long ago, like SOFA to whatever, like to marathon kind of thing, right? And so, but literally like the first day their task on the app was to like, walk a mile, and you're going to run for so many seconds at a time. So you're going to have to do a slow buildup, right? Like your muscles are going to have to slowly train and acclimate to that new experience. And over time you begin to build tolerance. And then you can increase the duration. You can increase different factors, right? If you're doing weight training, you don't pick up the huge, heaviest barbell or, weight the first day and expect that to go well, right? We have to start at a kind of a moderate level that we can handle, and then we build up strength over time. And that's just as true for any changes, any growth that we're looking to do in our mental, emotional life. That it's going to be something, if you think about, you're trying to learn and implement something new. So it's going to be a very similar process where you're going to have to start slow and build up. And you're going to have lots of repetition and reinforcement, just like you do in any exercise. What often happens, if you think about, you decide you're going to go run and then you try it and you're in pain and can't get very far, sometimes we'll just get discouraged and quit, right? And so it's really kind of important to recognize that there's nothing wrong with you. You just didn't know that's not how it works, right? But that, if you can learn to do something physically like that, then it's really an easy translation to doing that emotional work as well. And I kind of see it as a training you for resiliency. Like how do you handle flexibility, change in life? How do you learn to adapt, right? And a lot of that is with these sorts of things: time and patience, reinforcement, repetition.
That term resilience, I was waiting for it because that's a term we hear all the time. It's a term we use a lot.
It's hot right now. It's one of those trendy.
It's a big trendy word, but it's valuable. It certainly is valuable. And we all know that when people get out there and they want to go for that first run, or they go to the gym for the first time, there's a level of excitement. There's a high arousal there. And again, this will go back to, you have to have a plan, or how do you build that plan to make sure that you're ready. And that resilience is that item built over time. It's the wider the pyramid, the higher it goes. And so you want to make sure that you build that base over time. And that's a base built through resistance and grit, and kind of spending that time to build it over, so that you can make sure that when it gets a little bit more difficult, that your body has trained itself, and you're mentally, emotionally, it's like you've changed your process so that you've been trained and ready for those next steps. Because you're not going to peak on the very first day. It's a long time.
Right. Yeah. Very similar. I find it just very similar, right? Like you can't expect to be able to hold a heavy weight. Your muscle is, but if the repetition rate becomes easier and it doesn't feel as challenging.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Okay, so how much is enough to benefit? So the recommendations are, and I'm sure there are different recommendations. This is a recent one that I found. So 30 minutes of moderate activity 5 times a week, or a total of 2.5 hours a week. And I kind of like that breakdown, so I did break it down. So that doesn't mean that you have to do 30-minute modules, right? They don't have to be in those 30-minute increments. Basically the argument was that you could break it up into 2 15-minute intervals a day, 3 10-minute intervals a day. If you're really busy during the week and don't see how you can fit it in, you can do 2.5 hours on the weekend. So I think that the idea of that flexibility versus I have to religiously, go 5 days a week and do at least 30 minutes, I think that sometimes can also be a huge barrier too, right? So to know, and I think the other part that's important in here is moderate activity. So it doesn't mean you need to go take the most intense, highest heart rate challenge, and strenuous, fitness class or run sprints or, anything like that to get this benefit. I think it's just a moderate increase in your heart rate. You might be able to speak a little more to that, Paul, but that's what I recall, that it certainly doesn't have to be in really intense exercise.
Yeah, we like to say seek a state of breathlessness. So you're going to a point where it's a little bit more difficult to talk. That you'll notice this when you're taking the stairs. If you take 3 to 4 sets of stairs in a row, you're going to find that point where you're like, all right, I got to catch my breath a little bit. If you're doing that for 10 minutes, 3 times a day, there's your 30 minutes. If you're doing there, you can break that up. So that could be a matter of, I just take the stairs at work rather than, taking the elevator. That could be a way to find that moderate activity depending on how tall your building is. So there's different ways to find it, but I think that easy cue of find a state of breathlessness where you have to catch your breath and you can catch it, return, and go back to where you were. That's kind of a good way to kind of measure it easily.
Thanks. Yeah. Can you move? Yeah, we go. All right. So I wanted to include in here, I thought this was really helpful because, it's easy to throw all this out here. But if it were just about educating people on the benefit, I think that, we probably see everyone or most people exercising regularly without us having to talk about it much. And so particularly, I think if people are experiencing mental health issues, depression, anxiety, and various other diagnoses, there are barriers that they're going to identify that are very specific to that. And so I think to kind of be able to address some of that, often when I see somebody who has depression or anxiety, one of the first things that when I do a consultation, we kind of get that overall, the picture of what's going on, blah, 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 and we'll plan to meet. But usually in that first session, I'm going to educate them on behavioral things they can do, which are the most basic and they need the least from me. And so to me, it's a place to start. And so one of those might be talking about exercise. But if you imagine if somebody is struggling with depression and they don't feel any motivation, they're always tired, they feel sort of down about themselves, discouraged. And you say, all you need to do is go out and exercise, you're going to feel much better. That could be really discouraging, I think, in and of itself. So I really try to approach it when I talk about it as I really know that this is going to sound ridiculous. And I want to talk about why I'm explaining this or why I'm suggesting it and what, and also realistically what that could look like, right? So I know you're not going to feel like doing these things, in particular at the front end. So right here, feeling exhausted. So obviously, and that's not just for depression. I think most of us feel exhausted, a good part of at the end of a day sometimes. So, but it can really just feel like working out will make it worse, right? Like it seems like the last thing we want to do. But I think this is where, some of that, the things that we point out before, that exercise is actually, it's an energizer. And I know for myself, I'm usually pretty tired by the end of the day, and because I work out in the evening, I usually will kind of have to drag myself there with the motivation, knowing that I will feel better after I do it. But it's because it gives me an energy boost. And so there is something, that's real, but you have to kind of do that a few times enough to feel it, to kind of, to really trust that for yourself. But, like they say here, studies show that regular exercise can dramatically reduce fatigue and increase your energy levels. So I like what they suggest, promise yourself a 5-minute walk. So it's sort of like, don't go with the all or nothing. Like, I'm really tired, I can't do anything today, I'm just going to lay on the sofa here. But maybe it's the 5-minute walk, right? Because that's what often happens. You don't usually just walk for 5 minutes once you're out there. So it's also just breaking it into something smaller and giving yourself get out of the all or nothing. But to know that actually exercise will give you more energy, not less. So also feeling overwhelmed, and that is often the case when you're depressed. Also anxiety, you're just, so many things are spinning in your head. Yes, feeling like there's another commitment or obligation for somebody that is really not helpful. And often I'll try and talk with clients about what does your schedule look like, and when and how could that be realistic. So kind of being able to break it up and find ways to do it that aren't going to be basically asking them not to get sleep or eat that day or something, because that's how it can feel. Basically I think it's kind of looking at that and figuring out what's what I often talk about is it's part of that. Exercise can be part of their treatment plan. So just as they, some people might end up taking a medication every day to help regulate the chemicals in their brain that are decreasing mood, right, or impacting their mood, the regular exercise is going to help impact it too. And so, because when we say we don't have time or we're too overwhelmed, a lot of times it's because we're prioritizing other things, and we're thinking that the exercise is not of any benefit or value, right? It's kind of like this extra hobby. And for some people, there can be hobby parts to exercise, but we're not really talking about that kind of thing, right? We're just talking about getting enough physical activity that you actually can help benefit your mood and outlook. So to kind of recognize that it doesn't have to be that kind of thing either. But it actually makes us more focused, and it can kind of help slow down the process a little bit of what we're thinking about. And we can figure out a way to see it as part of our treatment plan and incorporate it into our days in a way that can be effective. So feeling hopeless, that makes sense, right? Like if you feel hopeless, it's why bother, right? Why bother exercising? I think that it gives you something to be motivated about, right? And maybe at the front end, you don't care, right? Like you're not identifying a real care for that motivation, but sometimes just getting into the process of doing something that requires you to go for certain goals and take these steps, often the motivation can come over time. So they're talking about here, like if you feel out of shape, blah, 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 like you don't want to exercise. And I think that's very common, right? Like if I don't feel good about myself and my body, I don't want to get out there and be aware of that. And, that'll just make me feel worse. But usually, that actually, as you're doing it, you see positive changes. And sometimes it's just that you can do it longer without getting really out of breath. You do that does improve your self-esteem. And so that actually is a positive movement. And then you can be more motivated. And so you build hope unintentionally, even if you're not going for it. So feeling bad about yourself. So again, thinking about the right setting, the right place to do it. So for some people, maybe that really means I want to do this at home. Right now, that's super easy with so many options available on streaming. But I need this to be at home right now. I don't want to exercise with other people. But sometimes having people that you feel comfortable with is really important, or accountability. So finding what environment and what setting is actually going to work best for you too. And sometimes it's things like what you're wearing. Like if you're wearing clothes that are really tight fitting and you don't feel really comfortable about your body right then, maybe it's about rethinking that part, right? Like let me wear something that I feel really comfortable in and good in, and then I don't focus on that as well. So kind of making it, putting the right setting in place for yourself. And that might even include costume changes, right? Like what you're going to wear. And then feeling pain, right? So if people have any kind of health issue or weight issues, things like that, then sometimes it can really feel like there's limitations on what you can do, or fear that you're going to hurt yourself by exercising. And in that case, obviously, you want to talk to your doctor or to kind of get a good sense of what it actually means. Like, what are my actual limitations? Because more often than not, yes, there may be some things you can't do, but there are probably others that you can that would still give you this benefit.
And I'd always make the plug, come find us at the UREC. We'd be happy to help.
Yes. Yeah. Talking to people who are trained in this, right? Like, I'm betting Paul could give a lot of advice and guidance on, what to move toward, like if you are identifying, like, I really don't like doing this sort of thing, or I have issues with this, not that you would claim to be a doctor, but that you probably understand a good bit about exercise physiology and, what works for different people in different bodies and different circumstances. So you don't have to do it alone or be alone in it. And I think UREC is a great resource for anyone who's affiliated with LSU to utilize.
Exactly. And I think that's why there's so much value found in personal trainers and your fitness instructors, is that there's somebody that can hold you accountable, but they're also somebody that help you take you along that process so that you don't feel alone on it, that you can be working with somebody else who has a little bit more knowledge. You can treat it as a mentor as much as a trainer. And sometimes they're the ones who just help you get past those first few barriers that you put up for yourself. That last point on there, the feeling of pain, they can help work with you to make sure that those areas that you might find a little bit more pain in, they can progress around there, or they might be the ones who point you to a doctor first because they've recognized this because they've seen it so many times. And then also the understanding of what is soreness versus pain.
Right.
Time you're exercising, it's going to hurt a little bit if we've done it a little bit right there, just because of the level of soreness. Progressing past that, we can kind of find growth and progress down the line over time. Your body adapts, and that's how it works over time. But they're going to be the right ones to kind of work with you to make sure that you adapt and progress safely.
Yeah. Well, I just also wanted to point out, as I said, I work at LSU in the mental health service, and just to let people know, we are still providing services. At this point, we're doing all teletherapy services, but we are still available and reachable. We are available to any LSU student, and the process is exactly the same as it would be when we're actually in the building, in the clinic. Just call, and one of our staff can help get you set up the consultation, and we'll guide you through that process. You already have access to the online platform that we use as an LSU student. And then there's a link for also on there as well. And I've already given Paul the PowerPoint, so if anyone wants any of this information, it's available. That's all I've got. References.
Awesome. I'll go ahead and leave it on that page for our wrap up, just so that if anybody does have questions or will write down that number, they can. And just as a reminder, this entire presentation today has been recorded, and that's something that we'll do our best to make sure is up on the UREC website. Make sure you do check out lsuuniversityrec.com for all of our programming while you're at home. We have our group exercise classes up there with our virtual schedule, where we have classes going every day. And then also classes that are already recorded that you can always check out. Those are always really valuable when you're kind of mapping out what your workouts look like moving forward. I can quickly jump over to the chat room. If anybody has any questions, feel free to add those in there. If there's any questions that we're not able to address today, we'll certainly circle back around with you. We'll work with Christen to make sure that we can get some answers. Or if you need to contact Christen directly, we can assist in getting that process going for you as well. I haven't seen anything in the group chat just yet. So if nothing comes through over the next minute or so, we'll just want to say thank you so much today, Christen. I think there's a lot of great takeaways from what you talked about. We know that topics such as depression, mental health, anxiety, and just making sure that we kind of have these ways to work through a lot of these issues, and that there's support out there, especially on campus, both at the Student Health Center and then what we provide at UREC for the physical activity side. We want to make sure that we're addressing well-being in all areas, from the physical wellness side to the mental health wellness side, trying to make sure that we work together to provide all the opportunities for anyone within our LSU community. There was a question that came up. Do y'all feel comfortable going to gyms yet? I feel a little frustrated that they reopened them already. In general, the UREC is not open at this time. But I think if you are going to a gym that is not the UREC, it's going to be a matter of your level of comfort. How are you protecting yourself? I know for anyone who might have access to a home gym or a apartment complex gym, that's a matter of utilizing your mask, maybe bringing your own wipes. I have an apartment complex gym where I live. I bring my own wipes. It's a very small space. And it's something where I notice if too many people walk into this space, all right, my workout's done for that day or it's done for that hour. And I can always come back around. So it's going to be a matter of keeping yourself safe and protected. And then there's always kind of that other side of like, do you have anxiety because of this? And I think that's something that, Christen, you might be able to address a little bit better.
Yeah. I mean, I would completely agree with you. I think it's a matter of choice. And because what I'm thinking is if you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to go, right? Like, and that's really one of the nice things is that there are so many different options. But I think that people are, I think it makes sense that people feel more anxious about it. I certainly am much more conscious than prior to this. But in general, I think you're leaning back on what you know and what feels safe for you. I think there's no one judgment call that can be made for everyone. But I guess what I'm aware of is it's really your choice. So even if a gym is open and you don't feel safe yet, then keep doing what you are doing, right? Utilize some of these other resources, exercise outdoors, download some of the UREC training. I think it doesn't matter whether it's open or not. If you're still feeling uncomfortable, then that's all you need to know. That's what I would say.
And there's nothing worse than a workout that is just riddled with anxiety.
Right.
Because as you mentioned earlier, those ruminations, you're not going to be focusing on what you want to focus on. And ultimately that'll make that workout that much less safe.
Right.
You're going to be worried about everything around you and not focused on what you're doing.
Yes.
And depending on that workout and the level of intensity that you're exercising with, that's not always the best thing for you. And this is actually a topic that Ethan and I discussed a little bit last week on our live Q&A, is that easing back into utilizing the gym and fitness areas, is that you shouldn't be going back at the highest intensity when you get back in there, because your body might not just be ready for it. If you've spent a lot of time sitting down over these last few months, or you haven't been exercising, or your movement's been limited to walking around the neighborhood, to go right back in for your heaviest set on your back squat isn't the safest thing for you. So there's got to be kind of a slow progression to get you back to where you were, because if we think about it, we've had a couple months off now, and it's not just a matter of taking this off. That's something to be cognizant of. Well, great. Thank you so much for that question. That was a great one. I think we've spent a good amount of time on this topic today. So Christen, thank you again. We really appreciate your time and your willingness to kind of speak with us. Thank you to everyone who came out today. Again, this is recorded. We're going to go ahead and make sure that it makes its way to the LSU UniversityRec.com website. Be sure to check out our website for all details that are coming up for new programming that we're doing all across the board, from adventure to sport programs, aquatics, and then even what we're doing here with fitness and wellness. And then also be sure to check out your resources with Student Health Center across campus. I know they have a lot of fantastic stuff for you during this time as well. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. Christen, thank you finally.
Thank you.
And,
enjoyed it.
Take care, everyone. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us directly.